am Dr. Marcus Thorne, and I have been practicing neuropsychiatry in Chicago for over 25 years. And throughout my career, I've encountered patients with the most diverse neurological and psychiatric conditions, from classic cases of Alzheimer's to rare syndromes that challenge our understanding of how the brain works. Somber, but there is one case that haunts me to this day. Not because of memory deterioration, but because of its absolutely devastating perfection. Before I begin, if you're fascinated by the human mind and the terrifying truths it can hold, consider subscribing. You won't want to miss what comes next. In March 2000, I received a referral that would forever change my understanding of human consciousness and the merciful nature of forgetting. The patient was Sarah Bennett, a 34-year-old woman from Chicago, who had been struggling for years with what she described as an impossible burden that no one seemed to understand. The referral notes from her primary care physician were sparse, but intriguing. Patient reports total autobiographical recall causing severe psychological distress, unable to forget any detail of personal experiences since age 14, requesting psychiatric evaluation for possible memory disorder and associated depression and anxiety. Patient appears credible, but condition seems unprecedented. When Sarah Bennett entered my office on Michigan Avenue that March morning, I was immediately struck by the intensity of her presence. There was something in her eyes that went beyond ordinary human experience, a depth of accumulated knowledge that seemed almost unbearable for one person to carry. She moved with deliberate precision, as if every action was being permanently recorded and would later be subject to perfect recall. "Dr. Thorne," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk with careful attention to detail. "I need you to understand something from the beginning. I am Sarah Bennett, and I've been living with something that I think might be destroying my sanity. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I hope you can help me understand why my mind works so differently from everyone else's." She paused, studying my face with an intensity that made me slightly uncomfortable. "I remember everything, doctor, every single day of my life since February 5th, 1980. I was 14 years old when it started. And from that Tuesday forward, I have never forgotten a single detail of any day I've lived. Starting on February 5th, 1980, I remember everything. That was a Tuesday. My initial reaction was professional curiosity, mixed with healthy skepticism. In 2000, there was no scientific literature on such a condition, no established diagnosis, no treatment protocols. Sarah was describing something that, as far as medical science knew, didn't exist. But something in her demeanor suggested this wasn't typical hyperbole or attention-seeking behavior. "Can you be more specific about what you mean by everything?" I asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. Sarah looked directly at me with those extraordinary eyes and said, "Pick any date from the past 10 years, Dr. Thorne. Any date at all. I'll tell you what day of the week it was, what I did that day, what the weather was like, what I ate for each meal, what I wore, what conversations I had, what was on television, what songs I heard on the radio. More importantly, I'll tell you exactly how I felt, what I was thinking about, and how those feelings are still as vivid today as they were when I first experienced them." The confidence in her voice was both impressive and deeply unsettling. "Let's try September 11th, 1995, I said, choosing a date that would have no particular significance for most people. Without hesitation, Sarah replied, "Monday." I woke up at 6:30 a.m. in my apartment on Lakeshore Drive. I was wearing a white nightgown with small blue flowers. I had just poured myself a cup of coffee, French roast with 1 sugar and a splash of half and half. When I turned on the Today Show at exactly 7 a.m., the lead story was about the preliminary peace agreement in Bosnia. I remember thinking how far away that conflict seemed from my life in Chicago. She paused, and I could see the memory playing out in her mind like a movie. "I can tell you every single detail of what happened next, Dr. Thorne. I had scrambled eggs and wheat toast for breakfast. I wore a blue sweater and dark jeans to my job at the school administrative office. At lunch, I went to a small cafe on Clark Street and ordered a turkey sandwich. The waitress was a young woman with red hair who seemed tired. That evening, I watched Friends and Mad About You on NBC. I went to bed at 10:47 p.m. after setting my alarm for 6:30 the next morning. The level of detail was staggering. But what truly convinced me wasn't just the specificity of her recall. It was the emotional weight she carried when accessing these memories. Over the next hour, I tested Sarah with dozens of random dates spanning the previous decade. Each time, she provided detailed, specific information that seemed impossible for anyone to fabricate. But then, when I asked about December 15th, 1993, she began providing details, then suddenly stopped. Her composure cracked for the first time. "That was 3 days after my father had his heart attack," she said quietly. "He was in the hospital, and we didn't know if he was going to survive. I remember sitting in the ICU waiting room, wearing a gray dress that I've never worn since, because it reminds me of that terrible week. I remember the exact words the doctor used when he told us Dad was stable. The way my mother's face looked when she cried with relief. The smell of the hospital disinfectant that made me feel sick. The pain in her voice was fresh and raw, as if the experience had happened yesterday, not 7 years earlier. Do you understand what it's like to live with emotional pain that never fades? Kalbandi. When something traumatic happens to most people, time helps them heal. The specific details become blurred. The emotional intensity diminishes. But for me, traumatic experiences retain their full emotional power indefinitely. I don't just remember that I was scared when my father was dying. I feel exactly as scared right now as I did 7 years ago. This was when I began to grasp the true psychological devastation of Sarah's condition. Normal human memory is inherently selective and merciful. We remember the broad strokes of our experiences, but the specific details, especially the painful ones, naturally fade over time. This process allows us to heal, to find perspective, to move forward with our lives. But Sarah had no such psychological protection. She lived in a perpetual emotional present, where every joy and every trauma retained its original intensity indefinitely. I've been struggling with this condition my entire adult life, Sarah continued, trying to understand why my brain works this way. I've seen other doctors here in Chicago, but they either don't believe me or suggest it's some form of obsessive-compulsive disorder. One therapist thought I was making it up for attention. Another suggested I was having false memories or confabulating details. But I know this is different. This is something no one has ever encountered before, and the isolation is becoming unbearable. As our sessions continued over the following weeks, I learned more about the devastating impact of Sarah's condition on every aspect of her life. She described how her extraordinary memory had isolated her from normal human relationships because she remembered every inconsistency, every broken promise, every careless word, with perfect clarity. "Imagine never being able to let go of anything," she told me during our 4th session. "When someone hurts your feelings, most people eventually move past it. The pain fades. You gain perspective. Maybe you even forget exactly what was said or how it made you feel. But I can't. I remember every detail of every interpersonal conflict I've ever had. A thoughtless comment from a friend 5 years ago can still make me cry today because I experience it with the same emotional intensity as the moment it happened." This inability to forget had profound implications for Sarah's sense of self and personal identity. She described feeling like she contained multiple versions of herself, every age she had ever been, every emotional state she had ever experienced, all coexisting simultaneously in her consciousness. Most people have a sense of psychological continuity because they naturally forget who they used to be in specific detail, she explained. They remember the general outline of their personal growth. But the embarrassing teenager, the naive young adult, these past selves fade into comfortable abstraction. But for me, every version of myself that has ever existed remains perfectly preserved and emotionally present. This psychological phenomenon had created what Sarah called temporal confusion. Moments when past and present would blur together in her consciousness. She described experiencing what she termed memory storms, periods when traumatic or intensely emotional memories would spontaneously flood her awareness with such vividity that she would lose track of her current surroundings. "It's not like normal remembering," she said, her voice taking on an edge of desperation. "When you recall something from your past, you know you're remembering. There's a psychological distance, a sense that this happened to a previous version of yourself. But when I experience these memory storms, I'm not remembering, I'm reliving. I become 14 again, or 25, experiencing events with exactly the same emotional intensity as when they first occurred." But perhaps most disturbing was how Sarah's condition had affected her relationship with hope and the future. She described feeling unable to look forward because her consciousness was so dominated by the perfect preservation of her past. "Hope requires a certain kind of forgetting," she told me during one particularly difficult session. "You have to be able to let go of past disappointments, to believe that future experiences might be different from previous ones. But when you remember every disappointment with perfect clarity, when every failure and heartbreak remains as vivid as the day it happened, how do you maintain faith that tomorrow might be better?" This existential dimension of Sarah's condition revealed something profound about the relationship between memory and psychological well-being. Her perfect recall had not only trapped her in specific traumatic memories, but had fundamentally altered her ability to experience hope, growth, and emotional renewal. As I worked with Sarah over several months, I began to realize that I was witnessing something unprecedented in the field of neurology and psychology. This wasn't a case I could find in any textbook or journal. Sarah's condition appeared to be completely unique, representing a form of memory function that challenged everything we understood about how human consciousness processes and stores experiences. I spent countless hours reaching out to colleagues across Chicago and beyond, searching for any similar cases in the literature. Nothing existed. Sarah Bennett appeared to be the first documented case of what would potentially become a revolutionary discovery in memory research. During our sessions, Sarah described the complex relationship she had developed with her own memory over the 2 decades since her condition began. She had initially tried to view it as a gift, then as a burden, and finally as something more complex, a neurological reality that had fundamentally shaped her understanding of human consciousness and the nature of identity. "I've spent years being angry at my memory," she told me during our 8th session. "I've wished for brain damage, for amnesia, for anything that might give me the blessed relief of forgetting. But I've also come to understand that my condition has taught me things about the human mind that no one else could possibly know." Sarah's insights into the function of forgetting were profound and deeply moving. She had developed a unique perspective on the adaptive value of imperfect memory through her own suffering with its opposite. "Normal people think forgetting is a flaw," she said. "They wish they could remember more, recall details more clearly, preserve experiences more completely. But they don't understand that forgetting is the most merciful feature of human consciousness. That's what allows you to heal from trauma, to grow beyond your past mistakes, to maintain hope for the future." This understanding had not come easily to Sarah. She described 2 decades of struggling with depression, anxiety, and what she called temporal claustrophobia, the feeling of being trapped in the closed system of her own perfect memory with no possibility of escape or relief. "For years I felt like I was drowning in my own past," she said. "Every day brought new experiences that would join the permanent collection in my mind. But nothing ever faded or lost its emotional intensity. It was like being forced to carry an ever-growing weight that could never be set down." But Sarah had also developed remarkable coping strategies over the years, many of which challenged conventional approaches to memory and trauma. She had learned to compartmentalize different periods of her life, creating what she called memory rooms in her consciousness, where she could access specific time periods without being overwhelmed by the totality of her recall. "I've had to become an architect of my own consciousness," she explained. "I've learned to navigate my memory like a vast library, understanding which sections are safe to visit and which ones require careful preparation. It's taken me 2 decades to develop these skills, and they're still imperfect, but they've allowed me to function despite the weight I carry." Sarah's strategies included sophisticated mindfulness techniques, emotional regulation practices, and what she called temporal anchoring, methods for staying grounded in the present moment when past memories threatened to overwhelm her current awareness. But perhaps most remarkably, Sarah had found ways to use her extraordinary memory as a tool for understanding human nature and relationships. Her perfect recall of conversations and interactions had given her insights into patterns of human behavior that would be impossible for anyone else to perceive. When you remember every word of every conversation you've ever had, you begin to see patterns in how people communicate, how they reveal themselves, how they change over time, she told me. "I can see the evolution of relationships with a clarity that's both fascinating and sometimes heartbreaking." This ability had allowed Sarah to develop an almost supernatural understanding of human psychology, but it had also further isolated her from normal social connections. She described the difficulty of maintaining relationships. "When you can detect every inconsistency, every small deception, every moment of insincerity with perfect clarity. People are inconsistent constantly," she said. "Not maliciously, usually, but they misremember things. They tell stories differently each time. They claim to feel ways they don't actually feel. I can see all of these discrepancies because I remember exactly how everything really happened, exactly what was really said, exactly how people really behaved." This hypersensitivity to human inconsistency had made Sarah incredibly lonely. She had withdrawn from most social relationships. because the constant awareness of others' memory failures and social deceptions had become overwhelming. But during our work together, Sarah began to develop a more compassionate understanding of normal human memory and behavior. She came to see the inconsistencies and forgetting that she found so jarring as adaptive features rather than flaws. "I've learned that other people's imperfect memories aren't weaknesses," she told me during one of our later sessions. "They're actually features that allow them to maintain relationships, to forgive and be forgiven, to move forward from conflicts that might otherwise be insurmountable. My perfect memory makes me hold grudges and maintain resentments that would naturally fade for anyone else." This insight represented a significant breakthrough in Sarah's psychological development. She was learning to work around her neurological condition rather than fighting against it, finding ways to honor her extraordinary abilities, while still connecting with others despite their normal memory limitations. One of the most moving aspects of my work with Sarah was witnessing her gradual development of what she called artificial forgetting, conscious strategies for reducing the emotional impact of traumatic memories that she could never actually forget. "Since I can't naturally let go of painful experiences, I've had to learn to create artificial distance from them," she explained. "I've developed techniques for changing the emotional context of memories, for viewing them from different perspectives, for reducing their power to overwhelm me in the present." These techniques included sophisticated visualization practices, narrative reframing exercises, and what might be called memory editing. Not changing the content of memories, which was impossible for her, but altering her emotional relationship to them. "I can't forget the day my father had his heart attack," she said, "but I've learned to surround that memory with other memories of his recovery, of the gratitude I felt when he survived, of the lessons that experience taught me about appreciating life. I can't eliminate the fear I felt that day, but I can change its context, make it part of a larger story rather than an isolated trauma." This process had taken Sarah years to develop and required constant practice, but it had allowed her to find some measure of peace with her condition. She remained trapped in her perfect memory, but she had learned to navigate that prison with greater skill and less anguish. It was during our sessions that I began to realize that Sarah's case might be of enormous scientific interest. I had been corresponding with colleagues at Northwestern and the University of Chicago about unusual memory cases, and I remembered reading about Dr. Evan Hayes at the University of Illinois, who specialized in memory research and might be fascinated by Sarah's extraordinary abilities. "Sarah," I said during one of our sessions in May 2000, "I think you should consider reaching out to memory researchers. Your condition could provide unprecedented insights into how human memory works. There's a researcher at the University of Illinois, Dr. Evan Hayes, who might be very interested in studying your case." Sarah looked hesitant. "I'm not sure I want to be a laboratory specimen, Dr. Thorne. I've spent so many years feeling like a freak because of this condition." "You wouldn't be a specimen," I assured her. "You'd be a pioneer. Your willingness to share your experience with researchers could revolutionize our understanding of memory and consciousness. And perhaps through research, we might find ways to help you manage the burden you carry." After several discussions, Sarah agreed to contact Dr. Hayes. In June 2000, with my encouragement, she sent him an email describing her extraordinary memory. "Whenever I see a date flash on the television, I automatically go back to that day and remember where I was and what I was doing. It is non-stop, uncontrollable, and totally exhausting." Dr. Hayes responded almost immediately, wanting to meet her. Sarah's first visit to his laboratory was scheduled for June 24, 2000. "I'm scared," she told me before that first meeting. "What if they don't believe me either? What if they think I'm crazy?" "They'll believe you," I said with confidence. "And Sarah, I think you're about to change the world's understanding of human memory." This prediction would prove remarkably prescient. What followed would be years of groundbreaking research that would introduce the world to hyperthymesia and forever change our understanding of human memory and consciousness. Our regular sessions continued even as Sarah began working with the University of Illinois team. She would return from her research appointments with a mixture of excitement and exhaustion, amazed that scientists were finally taking her condition seriously, but also overwhelmed by the extensive testing procedures. "They had me recall what I did on Easter Sunday for every year since 1980, she told me after one particularly intensive session. "I wrote out 20 years of Easter memories in 10 minutes, and they verified every detail against my journals and public records." Dr. Hayes looked like he'd seen a ghost. As the months progressed, it became clear that Sarah's case was generating enormous excitement in the scientific community. Researchers at the University of Illinois were conducting brain scans, neuropsychological tests, and extensive interviews to try to understand the mechanisms underlying her extraordinary abilities. They're calling it hyperthymetic syndrome, Sarah told me in early 2001, from the Greek words for excessive remembering. Finally, my condition has a name. But the research process was taking its toll on Sarah psychologically. Being asked to repeatedly recall traumatic memories for scientific purposes was creating additional stress, and the attention her case was receiving made her feel exposed and vulnerable. "Sometimes I wonder if I made a mistake contacting them," she said during one difficult session. "They're fascinated by what I can do, but I don't think they fully understand what it costs me to do it." Over the following years, I continued to work with Sarah as she navigated her dual roles as patient and research subject. The University of Illinois team was making groundbreaking discoveries about her brain structure and function, but the psychological support she needed required ongoing therapeutic intervention. "The research is important," she told me in 2003. "I know that what they learn from studying me might help other people someday, but sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing into being just a case study, just SB, the memory phenomenon, rather than Sarah Bennett, the human being." It was during this period that Sarah experienced one of the most devastating events of her life. In March 2003, she married Mark, a man she had met online who truly understood and accepted her condition. But their happiness was tragically brief. Just months after their wedding, Mark suffered a massive stroke and died after 6 days on life support. The loss was devastating for anyone. But for Sarah, with her perfect memory, it created a unique form of psychological torment. She remembered every moment of their brief marriage with excruciating clarity, and the grief never faded or lost its intensity. Most widows eventually find some peace because the sharpest edges of grief soften with time, she told me through tears during a session following Mark's death. But I experience his loss as fresh and immediate every single day. I can't heal because I can't forget, even for a moment, exactly what I've lost. Today, when I work with patients struggling with memory problems, whether due to aging, injury, or disease, I often think about Sarah and the profound insights her condition provided about the adaptive value of forgetting. Her story serves as a reminder that the goal of treating memory disorders isn't always to enhance or maximize recall, but to help people find the right balance between remembering and forgetting that allows for psychological health and emotional well-being. Because Sarah Bennett's extraordinary memory taught me a truth that no textbook could ever convey. Sometimes the ability to forget isn't a limitation, it's one of the most essential and merciful features of human consciousness, allowing us to heal from trauma, grow beyond our mistakes, and maintain hope for a future that might be different from our past. And for those of us blessed with normal, imperfect memory, Sarah's burden serves as a profound reminder to be grateful for the gentle way our minds naturally soften the edges of pain, helping us remember love more clearly than loss, and hope more vividly than heartbreak. Her story remains one of the most remarkable cases in the history of neuropsychiatry, and I am honored to have been a witness to the beginning of her extraordinary journey into the annals of scientific discovery. Thank you for allowing me to share this remarkable story. My career has been filled with such cases, each a window into the human condition. Subscribe to the channel to join me for the next one.